In ancient Rome, one of the standard punishments for slaves who attempted escape was branding. If a female slave was captured after fleeing, her master had the legal right to have her branded on the forehead with the letters FVG, short for fugitivus, meaning runaway. This was done using a hot iron. The letters were either carved into a bronze or iron stamp, heated until red hot, and then pressed directly onto the skin. The process left a permanent scar that publicly identified the woman as a runaway. Branding served both as punishment and deterrent. It ensured that if she escaped again, anyone who encountered her could immediately recognize her status and return her. It also lowered her market value and marked her as untrustworthy property. Roman writers like Seneca and legal sources such as the Digest of Justinian referenced the branding of slaves. In some cases, slaves were also fitted with iron collars that bore inscriptions such as "Hold me lest I flee." Branding was not only legal, but considered routine by Roman society, reflecting the empire's brutal efficiency in controlling its enslaved population. Among the most common and immediate punishments for a female slave who attempted to escape in ancient Rome was public flogging, a violent and deliberately humiliating act designed to instill fear in others. If a female slave was caught trying to flee, she could be stripped partially or completely in front of the household or public space. She would then be tied to a post or frame, arms above her head or spread out, and whipped with leather thongs or rods, depending on the master's order. These were not symbolic lashes. The beatings were forceful enough to draw blood, tear flesh, and leave permanent scarring. The punishment was often administered by the villicus, the overseer, or other slaves acting under orders. In wealthier households or estates, slave punishments might take place in a designated punishment room or courtyard. The flogging was rarely private. Other slaves were often forced to watch. The point was not just to punish the runaway, but to send a warning. This will happen to you. Women, due to their status and perceived weakness, were often subjected to even more drawn-out humiliation. In Roman society, female modesty was considered irrelevant for slaves. The exposure of their bodies during beatings was intentional, meant to degrade them. Roman law, particularly under the Lex Petronia and writings by jurists like Ulpian, did not prohibit cruelty toward slaves. While a master could not legally kill a slave without cause under later imperial laws, beatings were fully permitted and widely practiced. The whip marks served a double function: punishment and identification. A scarred back signaled a rebellious slave, which could affect future resale for female slaves who attempted escape. Another widely used punishment in ancient Rome was the iron slave collar, a physical and symbolic tool of control. Once a runaway slave was caught, especially after a repeated attempt, the master could order her to wear a permanent metal collar around her neck. These collars were often custom forged from bronze or iron and designed to be clamped and sealed shut, making removal nearly impossible without tools. What made them more than just restraints was the inscription engraved or cast onto them. These messages typically read, some collars had rings or chains attached, allowing for additional restraint or leading. Others had information about the owner's location in case the slave escaped again. In essence, the woman wearing it became her own walking advertisement of captivity. The collar was heavy and uncomfortable, often worn all the time. It could cause bruising, skin infections, or abrasions, especially in hot climates or while working in fields. Female slaves forced to wear these were immediately identifiable as repeat fugitives, their status broadcast to anyone who saw them. Roman satirical texts and archaeological finds, including real slave collars discovered near Rome, confirm the use of this method, especially during the late Republic and imperial periods. It was especially common on urban slaves who had more opportunities to escape. For women, wearing a collar added an extra layer of humiliation. In a society that already stripped enslaved women of privacy and dignity, this object made sure that any sense of identity or agency was crushed under iron. If a female slave attempted escape, especially if she did it more than once, one of the most severe punishments she could face was damnatio ad metulam or condemnation to the mines. Unlike flogging or branding, this punishment was often a death sentence in slow motion. The Roman Empire operated a vast network of silver, gold, lead, and copper mines, especially in regions like Spain, Dacia, Sardinia, and North Africa. These mines were brutal environments where condemned slaves, criminals, and prisoners of war were sent to work, sometimes permanently. Female slaves who tried to flee could be forcibly transported to these remote mines as punishment. There they performed backbreaking labor such as hauling or breaking rocks, carrying heavy baskets, or clearing tunnels with primitive tools in near total darkness. These mines had no regard for the health or survival of the workers. There was no proper ventilation, no rest, little food, and constant physical abuse by overseers. Women often died from exhaustion, respiratory disease, or cave-ins within weeks or months. The use of forced labor in mines was legal and well documented. Roman authors like Seneca, Pliny the Elder, and legal texts from Justinian's Digest confirm that slaves and condemned individuals were routinely sentenced to the mines as irreversible punishment. In the case of women, mine labor was especially cruel. Aside from the intense physical toll, they were often subject to violence by guards and male laborers. Female bodies were not spared or protected, only used until death. Once sent to the mines, a slave was rarely ever seen again. It was a final exile, a form of civil death. There was no legal appeal, no rescue, no return to household service. For a female slave who ran away and was caught, being sent to the mines was Rome's way of saying, "You tried to escape once, now you will never escape again, not even with your life." For female slaves in ancient Rome, violence was not only a constant threat. It was often used deliberately as punishment, especially in response to acts of rebellion such as escape attempts. Roman law treated enslaved women strictly as property, not as persons. This meant their masters, overseers, or even other men in positions of authority could legally use sexual degradation as a tool of discipline. If a female slave tried to escape, punishment could be ordered to both inflict pain and destroy dignity. In many cases, the punishment was carried out immediately after capture. The woman could be stripped and subjected to rape by the master himself or by others he designated. The act was not necessarily in private. It could be done in front of other slaves as an act of power and humiliation. Another common punishment for escaped women was forced prostitution. A captured fugitive might be permanently assigned to work in a brothel, public or private, as retribution. In Rome's urban centers, state-controlled brothels, lupaneria, existed and slave women were commonly placed there to serve endless lines of men with no pay, protection, or autonomy. Punishment was also used to break the will of female slaves, especially those who had shown independence or strength of character. Roman literature and graffiti, particularly from Pompeii, reference female slaves in degrading terms, and legal records from the Digest show no protections against such abuse. While male slaves could also be sexually exploited, female slaves were disproportionately subjected to sexual punishment due to their gender and societal roles. These acts left deep physical and psychological damage, but they were considered entirely acceptable under Roman law as long as the slave's life was not taken without cause. The Romans did not see this as abuse. They saw it as maintaining order,